before we begin to demonstrate on seeding, I thought I'd just talk for a minute or two just about seeds themselves. Seeds, what we don't often think of, are actually viable and they are alive. All they need to germinate is to have the right conditions, the environmental condition, meaning air and moisture and soil media. Those are some of the important things. Once they have the right environment conditions, then they will start to germinate and sprout and so on, and we'll get our lovely plants. Just to, perhaps you can't see, but this is like the peanuts that you're eating, and this is without a coat, of course, but that's the embryo, and that is the main part of the plant that produces the whole future plant. At the very tip, if you look closely, which you can't see, but there is a little radicle, and that is the very tip on each plant is where the root starts, and also the stem and the leaves. That's where they all start, no matter what kind of seed you have. Seeds come in a whole large area of sizes, and I guess one of the biggest ones is the coconut, which is the largest seed. And then there are the begonia seeds, and if you compare those two, if you think about a pinhead would have anywhere between 300 to 500 seeds, show you just how small and minute begonia seeds are as compared to some of the other seeds. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about the seeds. What we're going to demonstrate is something that I have been doing my way of doing it, and that is not necessarily the right way. Everybody can form their own technique in how to do things, but these will be just some guidelines and some ideas of maybe what to follow and to help you along the way. What I like to use is these small little trays, and they can be bought at a dollar store, very cheap, and they're very convenient. But you can use any kind of container for starting your plants, doesn't really matter what. Some of these are used for transplanting, but they can also be used for seeding, so those are very good. Even some of your little plastic containers where some of your lettuce comes in, or different kind of foods, they are actually excellent little mini greenhouses. All you need to do is put a little bit of paper in the bottom, any kind, and just to kind of conserve it, you simply fill the soil in, and you'll follow the same procedures, but I'll show you after a while. This is just a little bit larger one, but any of these are really good, excellent containers to do small planting in. And even some of the larger containers, if we run out of containers, just make sure that you do have holes in the bottom of all the containers that you use. That's the most important thing. If we want to find out whether our seeds are viable or not, we can simply drop some in a container of water, and if they sink, then they are viable. If they float to the top, then they're not good. Now, some of the seeds, of course, like marigolds, zinnias, that's a little bit hard to do, but most of the seeds you can do that. Otherwise, again, you can use a paper towel, moisten it very nicely, and put some of your zinnia seeds or marigold seeds on here. And if you want to be exact, you can count them out, 10 or 20, and you put them in a little plastic bag and set them aside in a warm area. Check them after 3 or 4 or 5 days, and then you can see how many seeds have actually germinated by the little sprout coming on, the little root coming out. Then you'll know how many are germinated. And this is especially good if you have old seed, because sometimes the old seed is very poor at germinating. And then you can tell if you have 70% or 80% or even 100% seeds that are viable and good to germinate. So those are just a few little things that can be done. As I said, I like to use these, and any other ones can be done. There are different kinds of soils that you can use. There's the potting mix, which is used mainly for potting on. but I like to use some of that in the bottom of the containers. So I usually, because the reason for that is that it does have some nutrients in it. So this is what I like to do, is add a little bit of the potting soil at the bottom of a container, and then you actually have a good seed starting mix, which is nice and fine. And that is what I like to, what's in this container. So I like to add that on top, and that becomes the seed. So now it's very important that you plant seeds either very openly or in rows. And the reason for that is that one of the biggest problems with growing and starting seeds is once they start to germinate is damping off. And damping off affects the plant right at the soil level, where a fungus catches the roots at the very stem at the very bottom, and they fall over, and there's really nothing you can do about that, and the seeds are gone. So by planting in rows or making sure there's a lot of space between your seeds, it allows the air to move, and that helps to keep the soil dry on top. And for that reason, it's also very good to water in the morning, even these containers, or make sure that they have a nice dry conditions to grow in, so that the surface of the media stays as dry as possible. As I said, I've been doing this for decades, and so through the years, for me, I simply developed a little block of wood, which is very handy. What can be done is the bottom is flat, it fits nicely in there, so if you have fine seeds, very fine seeds, they need to be spread just on the surface, and we have to have a nice firm surface like this for the fine seeds. If you have larger seeds, you don't really need to press it down. You simply make the rows as such. And let me just show you these. So these are, as you can see, the rows, and depending on the seed, if you have marigolds and so on, that's fine. If you have petunia seeds, then you can just firm it a little, very lightly, so that the rows are not quite as deep. So basically, very fine seeds just need to be spread on the surface, and other seeds, quite often here, like 2 to 3 or whatever depth. The biggest problem in starting seeds is that they are planted too deep. So they don't need to be covered very much on the hole. So that's the biggest thing. Just to let you know that the library here, as of today, has their seed program started again, and you can get all your plants here, marigolds, zinnias, tomatoes, and all kind of seeds that you can get at the library here. So you don't have to go running to the stores and so on to buy them, or buying on from a catalog and so on. Zinnia seeds are fairly large, so they can go pretty deep. So what I am used to, because I've done this a long time, I can just simply tap them from the package because I'm doing it. But what is ideal is actually have a piece of paper, white piece of paper, fold it in half, especially for the smaller seeds, because if you sprinkle these on a little paper like this, and these are still quite large, of course, but we'll see some smaller seeds in a minute. It's very handy to put them on a piece of paper, because then you can actually see how gently they are tapped out. Because the smaller seeds in particular, you have a tendency to put them way too thick. And if they're extremely small, then you can actually mix a little bit of sugar in with the seeds. So that will help you to sprinkle them a little bit farther apart. The sugar will simply melt normally, and the seeds will be a little bit farther apart, and the sugar is not going to hurt anything. So that's one way. You can also use extremely fine sand, but sugar is simple and easy to use. So all you have to do then is simply tap, and just carefully the bigger seeds you don't usually have to worry as much of because they automatically fill in quite big. I'll just add a couple more there. And so there you can kind of see what they look like. Now, you may not need that many seeds, so you can use a smaller container like a little pot or one of these little containers. Any smaller container will do. Only then, and then you can actually, on these small ones, you can actually simply pick them out of your hand, and let's just go like this here for a second. Just firm it nicely. So then you can actually even make a little hole with your hand and put 2 or 3 seeds in one little pot. And you can just firm them down gently and jiggle a little bit, and that should be fine on little pots. See? Tried the marigolds again, so we'll just firm it down very lightly. Doesn't have to be very light because marigolds are fairly large seeds. I will make the furrows or the rows, and they're just nicely. And again, I will put some in a little paper so that you can see them very carefully. They're quite large. So we'll just work it like this, and then just simply tap the paper very gently, and just move it very gently, and you can actually see them coming off. And then you can use your, if they don't all fall in, use your pencil and move them around. If they're a little bit too thick, you can separate them a little bit with your pencil as well. And what they're nice, if they're nice and fine in like that, you can just take the pencil, because the furrows are pretty deep, and just move it back a little bit in between the rows just to cover them up gently. And if you think it needs a little bit, you can add a little bit of soil to it. But as I said earlier, the biggest problem is, and marigolds is another one, that they don't need to be covered very much. So simply firm them a little bit, and then give it a little firm on the top, just like everything, and that would be your marigolds. And if you don't need a big amount like that, then you can again use a smaller amount in a little pot. Just separate them a little bit and just make a little hole with your fingers and just put a couple in, sprinkle a couple in, ever so gently, just very few, don't need all of them, and firm them again with your finger, tap a little bit, and that should be fine for the marigolds. Now the next thing is the most important thing, and that is, what I like to do is either right away leave the package on the seeding tray, because otherwise you might forget which are which. The other thing is, right away, right on whether it's a wooden stake or a plastic stake, doesn't matter, but right away write the name of the plant. So this would be marigold, and the variety, crackerjack, and then you would write the date that you plant your seeds, because that's important to write down the date, because marigolds should germinate. Most of them will germinate in about a week's time. Some take 2 weeks or longer, and some short. But if they don't show any sign of germinating after a week or so, then you can double check. Oh, I planted those a week ago or 7 or 4, and nothing's happening, and you can double check on that. So the other thing is that if you don't put a tag in right away, you may think that you remember what they are, but you will forget what they are. So it's important to right away write down the name and the date and the variety. That is very important. I'm sure is another one that many of you will use. So just to demonstrate a bit further. And again, the same thing. made my rows, and okay, I will just do different and just go by the package, which is what you can also do, because you can kind of see where they're coming out. Takes a little while. This shows you a little bit better because they're nice and white colored, so you can see how they are. And again, if they're a little bit too close together, you can just use your pencil and move them apart a little bit. And then, again, firm down a little bit if you like. Add a little bit of soil to it just to cover them lightly. And I like to just firm it again a little bit. And so, there again, that's just your cucumbers. And again, the important part is, Market More 70 cucumbers. And the date. So there we go. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. I haven't covered the zinnias yet, so I know that those are zinnias. These are, as you can see, they're nicely compressed, but they need to have a little bit of soil on top. So these were the zinnias. And again, just nicely firm a little bit, back down a little, just gently tap them, and we'll put the name on there. Now you can use a Jiffy marker. It shows up nice and good, but the best, simple, cheapest way of making names, whether it's on wood or plastic, is a good old BH2 pencil. They will outlast all summer long. At the end of the season, you'll still see whatever's written by pencil, you'll still see it. And most often, no matter how good a marker you have, like Jiffy marker, whatever, it will fade out and you will not find out what it's like. So a good old pencil is really the best item to use. The next thing is moisture. And I like to use a little can of this type, which is very handy. You want to make sure that they are very finely misted. Make sure that they're nicely saturated. They will need a little bit more than that, but I'll just do that for now. Okay, here's an amaranthus. And I will use that again on a piece of paper so you can see again how fine that is. And we'll just make a very, very shallow little trenches, because again, the fine seed, the tendency is to really sprinkle it way too much. And this way you can actually see there's probably, like, doesn't look like much, there's probably 50 or 100 seeds right there. And that's about all you'd want. And I'll just sprinkle them. You can just see them gently roll off the paper this way. And I can assure you there's way too many there, so that's plenty. And again, if you have a little package, you want to make sure you put it right back into the right container. So that is amaranthus, and maybe you can see the little seeds, but they're very fine, so they don't need to be, but all you do is press them down a little bit. You almost don't need to cover. The finer the seeds, the less you have to cover them. Just very gently cover them a little bit, and then just by sprinkling them again, that will settle and ferment well enough into the soil. And again, the date when you plant them. So that gives you a little bit of an idea about how to seed them and how to plant them. And then, of course, you like to cover them up, and for these trays, a nice plastic top comes in, just nice and firm or nice and solid on top, and it keeps the air moving and keeps the moisture in. I didn't bring along, but you can also get a heating mat to put them on, which is very, very helpful. They're not too expensive, and that makes the soil very nice and warm. It just means that they will germinate a little bit quicker. And the important thing is to, after 2 or 3 days, make sure that you keep a good eye on it. So as soon as you see signs of germinating and they start coming up, then you have to remove the top. And in all likelihood, now you have different ones, so you'll simply, if this was to start germinating, you would simply take it out and put it aside and keep the lid on till the other ones germinate. So that is the other way of doing things. The next thing is, once they germinate, you can see here's one that has started to germinate, and if you look closely, you can see that this was very fine seed, and actually I have seeded these way too thick, and I've been doing it for a long time. So you can see the finer the seed is, the important part is to sprinkle them very thin. So that gives you an idea when they start to germinate. Make sure they go out from underneath the plastic, out in the open air, and into good light. Good light is important. So for many folks, you use grow lights to grow them under. And if you have grow lights, that's great. If you are thinking about buying some grow lights, the newer light tube is a T5. T5 is a little bit more expensive, but they are very good and very long lasting. The balance is really good, so I'm simply suggesting that you use a T5. But there's nothing wrong with the old systems that many folks have. So that gives you a little bit of an idea there, and I thought I would just go on for one more minute on potting on, transplanting them. And these are tomatoes. Now they're really too small to transplant. They should really be a little bit larger. What you need is, if you can see it here, these are the seed leaves. Those are the cotyledons, and the plant starts on top of that. So technically what you like to see, it's almost too hard to see, but these are still just the cotyledons and a little plantlet start. So you like to have the plant starting about 2 or 3 or 4 leaves, whatever, before you transplant. Tomatoes are very good, so you can transplant even at this stage. And I'll just do that just for a second, just to show what you can do, and I'll just use a regular potting mix. Any kind of pots can do for transplanting in. These are all little plastic ones, but again, I had thought about it, not should talk about it. These are little containers with plastic, yogurt little containers that have been used. Make sure you put little holes in there. But these are also excellent containers, so you can use anything that's suitable to transplant your plants in. I just want to show you a little bit on how I like to do it. I like to use a little wooden stake, and I don't know if you can see this or not, but simply dig out a little clump, all right, and shake the soil off a little bit. What you like to do is always handle them by the leaves. Now these are just the cotyledons, so those are not really true leaves, but you like to handle them by the leaves, because if you damage the little leaf, no problem. The roots are very important, and they can easily be damaged. So simply make a little hole, and if they were really showing good size, you can actually firm down. And ideally, you use your thumb and your finger and press nicely down on the outside, straight down, not toward the middle, because then you could damage the roots. So simply jiggle them nice and roots by using the leaves. Simply put them in like this. I quite often use a finger and a stick, just firm it down. Little ones you can just set aside again. And as I mentioned, these are just not quite large enough, but they will do. They will grow like this too. So that gives you an idea. And what I didn't mention beforehand is your media, what you're using, you have to make sure that it is moistened well beforehand. You don't want to have dry media. Make sure that it's nice and moist. Doesn't have to be saturated, just nice and moist. And so again, once you have these planted, you again just mist them nicely, water them in like and again, you can set these aside and grow them under lights or in the windowsill. And I didn't mention about when to start seeding. And I would say on the whole, except for some items, and especially if you go into vegetables, but most of your annuals, some perennials need to be done earlier, but annuals and most of your garden vegetables that you're using, they can be started mid-March. This is a good time to start seeding. It's around the middle of March right now, and for a lot of seeds, even April is still quite all right. I've been planting petunias for a school project for decades, and usually they are started in March, and they are really great, no problem. Normally we'd start them sooner, but again, no problem with starting seeds about middle of March is a really good time. I say, sometimes George say, like, wait until Paddy on St. Patrick's Day. Okay, so just to sum up a little bit, again, give you a bit of an idea on how to go about it. And as I mentioned already, that in most cases people start seeding too soon, because for the average home person, you run out of space where to put them unless you have grow lights. But even then, you don't need to plant seeds, plants out, like especially annuals and so on, till about middle of May, even toward the end of May. It's always been a good time. The soil doesn't warm up before that. And vegetables, of course, are different. There's a lot of vegetables you want to start earlier. But for most of your annuals, some of your perennials, they are really good too, but you would have started them a lot sooner. So don't start too soon. And I didn't mention anything about heat. Most plants, and I've got just one little tomato plant here, and they can be planted quite deep, but this one has been growing in just in the light. I have a few of them in the light of the garage door, which is quite cold. You can grow them if you have good light condition, like a room with a lot of windows and so on, and it's still on the cool side at night, no problem. If it's a little bit on the cool, even down to 10 degrees and so on, but say 15, 10 degrees at nighttime, that's fine. What it means that the plant is going to not grow quite as fast, but it's going to get a lot sturdier. And it just means that your flowers will be delayed a bit, but you get a lot nicer, sturdier, stockier plants if you have a little cooler night growing conditions. So don't be afraid if your room's conditions do cool down at night. And so I think I've pretty well, in very quick order, kind of covered most of it. And so for this summer season, I wish you the best in your garden experiences, and maybe have a lot of fun doing this, and especially too if you're growing vegetables, have a lot of fun, because that is very good, because you can start eating them all summer long and fall time. So that's it.